Hey everybody. So this is my first podcast and I'm doing it kind of on a whim here, so bear with me. I I assume and I hope that I'll get better over time, but if there are some inadequacies in this one, I hope you will allow me to be imperfect. So my name is Hayden Hartline. I'm 32 and I'm from the US. Been traveling around the world for the past few years, and in that time, as well as prior to the beginning of my travels, I've devoted a lot of my time and energy towards cultivating my own energy, cultivating my consciousness, and learning about these various faculties, ideally so that I can help others through formats like this. I created this podcast for the purpose of sharing what I've learned about life, meditation, and general well being and health. It's my intention that this information helps you in some way, whether it's exposing you to ideas that you're not familiar with or giving you some form of advice that brings you benefit. I sincerely hope that you leave here today with more than you came with. So, in today's episode, we're going to be discussing trauma. And I know trauma is kind of a hot topic, a trigger word in the real sense. And I hope that I don't cause anyone to have any kind of emotional backlash, but my only goal here is to bring some insight into some of the practices that I have used to benefit me. So, trauma is something that's prevalent in nearly everyone's lives, and if left unmanaged, it can manifest into some serious behavioral issues like anxiety, depression. There's even a lot of evidence that stuff like schizophrenia is linked to trauma or excessive activity in the nervous system that goes left unchecked. So while I'm not a doctor, nor am I a licensed therapist, I have learned a variety of techniques that have brought me benefit, and these are the things that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So, in my opinion, trauma occurs when we experience something that carries more energetic and or emotional weight than we can process in a single moment. I want you to think of your nervous system as like a series of hoses or water pipes. So, water, or in our case, energy, flows through our nervous system. And normally it's a slow and even flow. You have good pressure and there's nothing going on. But sometimes we face something that causes our nervous system to drastically increase the amount of energy, or in our analogy, water, flowing through. And so, what can happen is we can have essentially like a burst, or what will occur is we have so much energy that's going through our system that we actually block some of it out so that we can go on functioning in the moment. And in my opinion, this excess energy is what gets stored in our mental and physical memory banks as trauma. And so, if you consider all of the challenging things that you've gone through in life, some of them could be classified as easy to deal with, while others would fall into the category of intense or exceptionally challenging. And it's these small number of super intense events that are so overwhelming or so powerful in any given moment that we can't process or handle the entire volume of energy that we're experiencing. It's those events that end up causing us to start accumulating trauma. And so, on a flip side, trauma serves a purpose. It's just a learning mechanism in the same way that if you were to touch a hot pan, you experience pain and then you pretty rapidly learn that that's not a good idea. Trauma functions for that reason. And so, I think in an ideal scenario, we would be able to, shortly after the event occurs, process what we went through and learn whatever lesson is going to benefit us. This would allow the nervous system to reset and return our body to the status quo, or to homeostasis. But unfortunately, for a lot of us, we never get into a place of rest or a place where we feel safe enough to adequately process that event. And then we end up storing all that extra energy in our nervous system. And then what happens is this starts to accumulate over time, and we get left with a hyperactive nervous system where we're actually continuously, often consciously or almost always subconsciously, experiencing and re-experiencing these traumatic events as they were happening, or as if they were happening in that very moment. So essentially what's going on like behind the scenes is your body has this unprocessed scenario or this unprocessed information, and it's constantly pinging your nervous system in order to get your attention so that you ideally take the time or the space to process that energy and then to release it back into the void or into the ether. But because we have such hectic lives, and because our world is so stressful today, a lot of us never get a place where we're able to adequately process that. Essentially, you need a safe and calm scenario so that your mind can relax and you can go through that space or that pain. And in going through it, you're able to kind of relive it. And in doing that, you're able to, in most cases, process it. But because our world is so hectic today, it can be really challenging for us to have the safety that we need to actually process that. So I'm going to add a disclaimer in here. I think that there are numerous ways to resolve trauma and heal psychological wounds. What I'll describe as a practice later on in this podcast is something that's helped me and could be beneficial to others. However, it is important to know how you'll respond to certain practices. And it's very important to be aware of your mental and emotional health while starting a new practice like this. So, intentionally choosing to work with and resolve traumas can trigger powerful emotional experiences, and it's almost always better done with the assistance of a trained professional. Knowing that not everyone has access to this, I'm choosing to share this information in an attempt to provide additional tools to those wishing to do this work on their own. But be mindful because they can create intense experiences, and if you're prone to mental instability, you definitely want to speak with a licensed and a trained healthcare professional prior to doing any of this work. So I want to take a moment to describe the way that I view trauma. So I try to look at trauma purely from an energetic standpoint, or from an energetic point of view. And my goal here is not to diminish the pain that people have felt, but rather to allow or to create a disconnect from the emotional intensity of an experience so that people can actually work on these things and make changes. A lot of times we have trauma that's so powerful that it literally induces such a strong emotional response that your mental mind, or essentially your forebrain, which allows you for kind of like logical thought, will shut down and you go into kind of a fight or flight. And if you're in this state, you're essentially going to be impaired from thinking consciously, and it's going to make it really challenging for you to do some of this work. So if you look at your trauma as this blob of energy in your energy field instead of some experience that you had which was really painful, it can help diminish some of the emotional weight of the experience and allow you to do this work. So in my mental model, it can be said that trauma is equal to a quantity of energy or a volume of energy existing in our energy field that is vibrating at a certain frequency. When we look at trauma objectively in this way, it can allow us to do work on it without triggering the emotional response. Now, each of our traumas pertain to a certain topic or theme. For example, if in the past you had a painful experience while speaking in public, you could then categorize it as you have a public speaking trauma. And the reason I bring this up is it gives us a simple categorization system, which we can then apply later on while doing this work to choose what we're going to be working on. There's also avenues where you can leverage your intuition to have more of a holistic practice, but I would say that that requires a degree of self-knowledge and comfort with using your intuition, which when you're just doing things in kind of like an ABCD model, it can be simpler for someone who's just starting off with it. The reason that I want people to understand this kind of categorization model of trauma, or our energy field more so, is so we can then understand the next point. So using our public speaking example, if the public speaking portion of your energy field holds the potential for a non-traumatized... Ah, sorry, I'm reading this off a script. I misread something. So let's say that we have this trauma formation in our energy field related to public speaking. We can then assume that there's a possibility for this public speaking portion of your energy field to exist in a non-traumatized state. So assuming that you had never had that trauma, or that you happen to have been one of those lucky few individuals who excel in public speaking, then you would have this frequency pattern of joy or comfort or of happiness when you're thinking about or relating to public speaking. And so we can use this to create the logical jump that by working with our energy field, we can go from this state of terror or fear or anxiety, and by shifting it or applying energy to it, we can then shift our public speaking vibratory pattern from one of trauma to one that is existing in a higher vibratory state, such as love, joy, happiness. And this is going to eventually also help shift our behavior around this area. And that's what we're really looking for. We're looking for behavioral change. Because if trauma was just something that like hid in our energy field and didn't have any impact on our lives, then it wouldn't really matter. I mean, obviously, most of us want to better educate ourselves and we want to grow as individuals. But the real reason that trauma is so debilitating is because it has behavioral impacts. When you are afraid of going on public transit because you had a really terrifying experience once, then that's going to like create these blockages in your life, and that's going to start affecting your quality of life. And so for those reasons, that's why we really want to start addressing these traumas so we can release some of this pain and we can start to move more freely through our lives. Rather than being defined or dictated by these emotional responses, we can start to choose intentionally what kind of experiences we want to have, and we can kind of navigate life in that manner. So, in theory, the practice that I'm going to describe is actually quite simple. There are obviously some nuances to it, and there are some certain circumstances that might pose challenges. But the simple equation of shifting your energy field is using your intention. You create a high vibrational energy, such as love, joy, excitement. And then again, using your intention, you send this higher vibrational energy to the part of your energy field that houses the pattern you want to shift. So a lot of us store pain and experiences like this in our hips. That's, don't ask me why. That's just how it happens. So assuming this is like assuming that in your energy field some of your pain is stored in your hips, what you could do is you could create some high vibrational energy, and later on in the episode I'll describe ways that you can do this. And then simply by using your intention, and you don't have to complicate it, you just think, I want to send this energy to this part of my body or this part of my energy field, and it goes there automatically. So you create this high vibrational energy, you choose to send it to a particular part of your body or your energy field, and then essentially via physics, it starts to shift the energy in that space. So a good example of this is a tuning fork. You can take a tuning fork, and by like dinging one and holding it next to another, the second starts to vibrate at the frequency of the first. And that's because there are these sound waves or energy waves that are moving through space and they're vibrating space time. And eventually they reach this second tuning fork. And because the tuning fork is also a portion of space time, it starts to vibrate at this same frequency. And so that's kind of the method that we're using here. We're creating a frequency that we desire, and we're using it to shift a part of ourselves that is vibrating at a frequency that may be less than desirable. So, in the next episode of this series, I'm going to cover some of the issues that may arise while doing this type of work. But for now, I just want to go over the basics so that you can get a general theoretical understanding of how this works, as well as a practical understanding of how this type of practice works. After this episode, if you have questions or if you want to learn more, you can leave a comment somewhere, and I'll do my best to address that. That way I can start making more personalized and like tailored content addressing whatever questions you all have. So when starting out with this kind of work, it's important to know how you'll respond, because it's possible to uncover deep wounds and trauma that bring along with them rather intense emotional experiences. And if you're in an unstable or unsafe place in your life, as I said earlier, it's really important that you're mindful of this and you don't push yourself too hard. Well, I don't think you're apt or likely to have these like rather radical or negative experiences. If you've had very traumatic experiences in the past, it is possible for you to create such a powerful experience that you can have some mental instability, and we want to avoid that. So, in my experiences, you'll often have what I like to call a recovery day, usually a day after you do this practice. And so, for that reason, I'd recommend starting off very, very easy, and I wouldn't do this any more than 2 or maybe 3 times a week. The reason that I believe we have what I call a recovery day is because we're essentially allowing ourselves to have a similar mental and emotional experience to the original trauma so that we can then, therefore, consciously choose to respond in a different way. So I believe it's the universe essentially asking you, are you sure that you want to change how you feel about this? And so just keep this in mind, knowing that if you do really, really deep work on Monday or Tuesday, the following day you might have some interesting emotional experiences that seemingly come out of nowhere. But essentially, it's just a way for your body and mind to process this latent emotions and release it in a healthy way. So this is how I'd recommend you do your practice. It's always important, especially like in the spirituality space, to take everything with a grain of salt. Say I tell you that you need to do something this way and you feel like you should do it a different way, you should go with your own intuition. You are ultimately the wisest master or teacher for yourself. A lot of people are unfortunately looking outside of themselves for answers, and this can be beneficial. It's wonderful to learn from others, but ultimately the most powerful thing that anyone can do is to learn to trust themselves. So just take what I say with a grain of salt. If it's something that you feel like you would enjoy, maybe you try it. And if it's something that you don't enjoy or you don't feel like doing, then don't do it. And that's okay too. So with that being said, I would recommend start off by finding a safe or a sacred space to do your practice. If you have the same space where you do this practice on a regular basis, it can be really beneficial as you start to build up a resonance in that space, which allows you to dive more deeply into the work. And then the next thing that I would recommend is setting an intention of safety and protection. Again, we live in a chaotic world, and adding this layer of mental, emotional, and energetic protection can actually help to create more safety and more calmness in your mind, which will allow you to do deeper work. One of the ways that you can do this is by visualizing a white or a golden white light around your space. You can also say a prayer or a mantra if this is something that aligns with you, or you can call on your guides or angels to assist you in this effort. Also, burning something like sage will be beneficial prior to as well as after the practice. This can cleanse the energy and again kind of amplify the potential that you're creating in your workspace. So I would recommend giving yourself 20 to 30 minutes of uninterrupted time for this practice. If you're able to create a space that will prevent interruptions, it will be even more beneficial because there's nothing worse than like being in the middle of a meditation and your mom like walks in the door, "Hey, what are you doing?" and or something like that. And so by locking the door or letting your roommates or your family members know that you'll be busy, this again can further cultivate this feeling of safety, which will allow you to dive deeper into your mental and emotional bodies. So start off by taking 5 to 10 minutes or whatever you feel is best for you to meditate. And if you feel like you can incorporate some light breath work into it, you're going to be using your intuition in this part to kind of see when you're ready. But ultimately, your goal here is to quiet your mind and relax your body so that you're ready to do some deeper work. Once you've entered into a relaxed state, you can ask yourself this question: is there a part of me that is ready to be healed or is ready to be resolved? And if you've gone into the work with a prior intention of trying to work on a certain part of yourself, that's fine. But you can also leave this more open ended and kind of flow with it. Because what I've experienced is that you'll have like we're like freaking onions. We have various layers of emotional baggage that needs to be resolved. And if we're trying to like push on one area, you might find that there's another layer that needs to be resolved first before that deeper part of you can be healed. So just be mindful of this. In most cases, you will get some kind of message or intuitive knowing that some part of you is ready to be worked on. However, in some cases, there's nothing ready. And this could be for a variety of reasons. But if you ask yourself that question and in your inner self you hear nothing, do your best to be respectful of that. You can ask for confirmation. You can say, am I ready to do any work right now? Is this a time where I need to postpone this work? And so the key is just being gentle with yourself and as best you can leveraging your intuition to allow your intuition or your higher self to guide this process. So If a vision or an intuitive message does come through, you can thank yourself for having the courage to bring that part of you to light. And that's always nice because you're expressing self respect and gratitude for yourself. If you have these parts that have been wounded, a lot of times they feel as if they're weak and powerless. And by expressing gratitude to them, you're essentially giving them the permission to release and to transform into a higher vibratory form of their potential. So the next part of the practice is cultivating higher vibrational energy. We need this high vibe energy in order to shift our lower vibrational energy. And it's important to not think of the lower vibratory parts of yourself as bad or negative. It's just like as when you were a kid, there were some things that you didn't know and you needed guidance and wisdom and love and support in order to grow. And so rather than thinking of these parts of yourselves as bad, you can think of them as younger or less evolved, or just parts of you that need a little bit of assistance in growing into your highest potential. So, simply by intending to create high vibrational energy, i.e., thinking of love or joy, you will do so. There's a limit, actually, excuse me, maybe there isn't a limit, but in my experience, just setting your intention is kind of like layer one or level one of creating high vibe energy. So, yeah, if the simplest way that you can do this is by using your intention to think of joy, love, or compassion, any of these higher emotions, and then again using your attention to send this new energy that you're creating to the part of yourself that's being worked on or wants to be worked on. You can also send it to other people, which is will probably be another podcast episode, but it gets rather interesting when you have people sending love and joy to other people. It's lots of miracles and wonderful things occurs. So, in some instances, you may feel the need to increase the amount of energy in order to shift a past pattern. And so I recommend you do this type of work, or what I'll call level 2 work, sparingly, because essentially you're amplifying your energy production. It's like using a power tool, essentially. Like, you used to have people who are out there with like a shovel or something like that, and you don't have to worry about that. You can shovel all day long. But when you bring the jackhammer out, that's when you need to start putting on your safety hat and using some precautions, because you're amplifying the amount of energy that you have available to yourself, and in doing so you're amplifying the amount of energy that you can shift. And that's when you can get into some of these like challenging and more difficult situations. So if you feel that you need to increase your energy output, I would recommend asking yourself if it's okay for you to continue. And then what you can do is you can lean on or you can channel a past positive event, i.e., something that you had in the past that was really, really positive or made you really happy. Or on the converse, you can imagine something that's really happy. And so what you're doing here is you're now activating different sensory parts of your brain, whether it's your visual system or your auditory system or your tactile system. And in doing so, you're going to activate your nervous system more intensely. You're going to create a larger quantity of energy that you can then again use to shift more energy. So the last thing that you can do, and again, this is not like the ultimate, but in my experience, this is what I would call level 3. The last thing that you can do is you can incorporate movement into your practice. So by moving your body and ideally doing something that you enjoy, whether it's dance or yoga or running or anything that brings you happiness and makes you feel good, you can then once more increase the amount of energy that you have available to yourself. So a general rule of thumb is like the more parts of your body and mind that you're using in this positive way, the more energy you'll have available to yourself. But again, the caveat is the more energy that you create and the more energy that you apply, the more energy that you're ultimately shifting. And all of this energy that you're shifting is going to flow through your conscious mind eventually and will need to be processed or at least experienced. So just be mindful of that and do so sparingly. Always relying on your intuition when possible to see if this is right for you or if it's also right to back off and finish or do more work in another session. So that is the general practice. We'll kind of like walk through it again really quickly so that you can have a simplified version of it. So you'll start off by taking a few minutes to relax your body and mind. The next thing that you'll do is ask yourself for consent. This is really important and powerful because If you do this work enough, there will come a day when your mind or ego wants to make a shift, but your body, mind, soul is not ready to do so. And so, this step of asking for consent or permission is really important and is really powerful in allowing yourself to go through this practice or this work in a healthy and gradual manner. No one is going to transform themselves in just a moment. As nice as that would be, it's just not how the body works. Your body takes time to make changes, and so you need to be respectful of the time that's needed to go through these processes. So once you've gained consent and you're okay moving forward, the next step is creating this positive or high vibrational energy. And whatever way you do this is wonderful and adequate. Don't put pressure on yourself to be a master or try to be the most powerful thing possible, because in doing so, you're probably going to create restrictions or create expectations. And we all know that expectations are one of the most unsavory things that can be experienced in a spiritual practice. So just be gentle with yourself and do your best to allow yourself to go with the process or the pace that you're feeling at that time. And then lastly, take that new and wonderful energy that you just created and using your intention, send it in a loving manner to the part of yourself that is requiring or is requesting healing. And in doing so, you'll notice that you're shifting things. I hope I'm not leaving you all on a cliffhanger, because there are some things that can arise during this practice which will make it seem like you're not making progress or which will make progress more difficult. But if you join me for the next episode, I promise I'll cover these things and shed some more light on how you can incorporate this in a healthy way. So, yeah, that's it for our episode today. I want to thank you all so much for coming and joining me. If you're watching this, it means that I've been able to share some of my messages and some of my wisdom with the world, and that makes me really happy. If there's things in particular that you'd like to learn about, or if there's things in this episode that we covered that you'd want more information or you want to dive deeper on, please leave me a message and I'll do my best to incorporate that into future episodes. So, my favor to ask of you is, if you've enjoyed this or you felt it's been beneficial in any way, please consider sharing it with your friends or your family or just on social media, because that will help me out a lot and hopefully it'll help other people learn more and get some more valuable information. Again, I want to thank you all so much for joining me today, and I wish you the best. Take your time on your practice, allow yourself to go at whatever pace you feel is right for you, and enjoy every step, because at the end of the day, we're alive and that's a blessing. Much love. Namaste.